Good evening and welcome to another episode of Apolitically Incorrect Guyana. My name is KIAN Jabour and as usual, I am your host this evening. I keep saying I need to change that introduction so that people don't think it's the same episode over and over. At least I try to change my clothes. Nonetheless, I'm sorry we weren't here last Friday. I was out of the country, but I'm back very quickly because there are so many interesting things happening in and around Guyana right now that we on this show at least try our best, our bare minimum to bring to you issues and situations and things that are happening in and around Guyana from a different angle. That's our goal here, to look at things from a different perspective and hopefully show people that, Guyana as a people have a voice. And when you see something is wrong, you have to learn and understand that the only way to right it is to speak up. As the old tale, the old saying with the police, if you see something, say something. And the truth of the matter is, in this day and age, with all that we're watching happening in and around the world, I mean, even down to our situation on the border with Venezuela, if you see something, you have to say something. And in this case, it comes to the defense of our democracy, the defense of our rights as citizens here, the defense of what we as citizens are owed or deserve. And the truth is, unless we continuously fight for what us as Guyanese deserve, then we're not going to get it. So we as a people need to understand that saying these things, speaking out, is not always an attack on progress or to halt somebody from doing something or to stop a project, but sometimes it's to ensure that we get the best from it. And I think that often gets confused here. We know the two big political parties, that is their motto. From the time you say something wrong, oh, they're just out to get us. They're attacking us. No, we're not attacking you. Nobody is attacking anyone around here. But if we see something that's wrong, we're going to say it. And that's what accountability is. That's what transparency is. And this is something that at least us here on Apolitically Incorrect try to encourage and try to portray. So, we always have very open conversation here. And one of the people that we do that with so well is my guest this evening, Mr. Timothy Jonas, who has been known to speak his mind when the time comes, as everybody knows from the 2020 elections campaign. And the reason I have Mr. Jonas here as often as I do is because I think if we gathered anything from the 2020 election is that he looks at things from a very different perspective. And I think even as his professional background allows him, he also is very, very articulate in the way he explains certain things to us and then looks at things from a different angle again as a lawyer compared to us non-trained citizens. So thank you for being on again.
Well, thank you, Kian. You give me much more credit than I deserve. Law is just an accumulation of common sense over a couple hundred years. It's just common sense. And the truth is the truth. So if you combine common sense and the truth, I think usually you can see a problem and figure out a way to solve a problem. And hopefully that's what we can do. I agree with you about the need to speak, the need to speak out. Democracy is not a spectator sport. I heard a good friend say that, and I repeat it everywhere I can go. You do not get to enjoy democracy as of right. You have to participate, and you have to ensure that the pillars of democracy exist and are maintained, or else you don't even deserve to live in a democracy. Mm-hmm. So you got to be part of that process. Before we start, I want to give special mention to the two trolls that I see have been following you religiously and have been following behind me, Barbara Barbs and Ravi Singh. Please look out for them. They will be commenting. For people who dispute the importance of what you're talking about, those two invented and fake individuals follow you so faithfully. I admire them.
I always appreciate those that continue to follow me as avidly as they do. In my world, it means I'm doing something right.
I think so.
If you stand up and all you can tell me is very, very personal attacks on how I'm a crazy man or how I'm this and I'm that, and you can't quite dispute what we're speaking about, then it means that these people are gaining personally from what others are suffering from, and they'll do anything they can to defend it.
Well, again, common sense and the truth points you to how contemptible the whole thing is.
Yeah.
Because you have people who spend the time following you not to discuss issues, but to attack you personally. And you have to ask yourself, well, what's their motivation? Why are they doing it? And why are they doing it so consistently? And they got to be an ulterior motive, an ulterior pay, an ulterior profit. And how contemptible is that?
Yeah.
These are these patriots or are these mercenaries and prostitutes? And you have to ask yourself the question.
Good question. But what I think is important to always point out, and I like to make sure I state this very clearly to everyone, is understanding how social media, how the news works, especially in a country like Guyana, that there's so much state-owned media, for example, that I'll always remember it as from the 2020 election even more vividly. I remember the day that the PPP took office and how quickly the headlines in Chronicle went from stating elections debacle continues, no real results yet, to APNU rigged the election, PPP are victorious. And it was a full 24 hours transition from one party's propaganda narrative to the other party's propaganda narrative. And I thought it was fantastic.
I could go further because as you say, the management changed on what is supposed to be an independent paper, but we all know is a rag.
Right.
The former management under the former regime were writing articles that were attacking personally and libelous of members of the PPP and PPP favorites.
Yeah.
And a lot of them
lawsuits
were
ongoing.
totally unwarranted and got lawsuits.
Right.
So the new regime came in and installed their own management. And all of those lawsuits got settled and paid. Because suddenly all the favorites found themselves suing their friends.
Right.
And so many lawsuits were settled and payments made. Now, I would have thought that those lawsuits would have been withdrawn because there's been a change. Those terrible people.
No. Payouts. Give the people their money.
They are payouts.
Well, look at that. What a fight. Listen. If you guys need more. So just to clarify, just to speak in layman's terms, if you didn't understand what Mr. Jonas just said, he said, when APNU were in power, they had many lawsuits against the Chronicle and NCN and DPI, etc. Because when APNU was in power, they were attacking PPP people. So the PPP people started to sue Chronicle. So when the PPP took over, now that the PPP is a state-owned entity, you would think that instead of the PPP people just dropping the lawsuit and saying, okay, they're not going to talk bad about us anymore, they have taken state funds, taxpayers' money, and given it and settled it with the PPP people. So this was just basically free money. This is a whole situation that, how else do you describe?
No, I'm sure in many
what's
of those,
the word?
I'm sure in many of those cases, it was a legitimate and justified cause of action.
Right.
And maybe there was a grievance and maybe compensation was merited.
Right.
But it doesn't smell right, does it?
No, it doesn't smell right.
Certainly needed some kind of scrutiny, although I'm sure that in many of those cases, justice was done. But you don't pay yourself without somebody, some third party, some objective person scrutinizing it and putting a clean bill of health on it. But that's Guyana.
I got here, and I like what most people get frustrated with us about. They said, but y'all is just complain, y'all don't give no solutions. Okay, here is my solution. And you, as a senior counsel lawyer in this country, I want you to tell me if this may be something possible. So I have two options here. My first one is do away with all state media. Cut the government. If the government has a message to put out, let them pay. They're allowed to have their personal in-house media houses in the context of to disseminate their government information. But if they wanted to go into the larger audience, rather than taking government money into the failing NCN and the failing Chronicle and these government agencies that just keep taking money from taxpayers, why not just sell those out, privatize them, take any money that they are that those may have been pumped into, and if the government wants, they can pay the private organizations, the private news entities to publish their information.
No,
that's my first one.
Kian, you propose that lightly, but that is actually one of the recommendations that I would make in Parliament
Good.
if there was a place to say it and if there was a chance of succeeding. I'll give you an example. In the States, the legal structure says the state shall not be involved in the press because the press must be independent.
Right.
If the state owns the press is not independent.
Right.
Now, we see that in Guyana, in that the media that is owned by the state doesn't have to worry about profit margins. So they don't have to do a good job.
Yeah.
Because even if they're not legitimately selling papers, I promise you, every single ministry is buying Chronicle papers.
Right.
NIS, I promise you, is buying NIS.
On a daily basis.
Because it is state-owned, and that's how they pretend that they're making money.
Right.
So it doesn't matter what the content is. The other aspect of it is that anytime the state needs something advertised, that's where it's going, first and foremost. And more than that, there have been occasions in Guyana where the truly independent newspapers have offended the state, and the state has withheld ads from those independent newspapers. So by having state-owned media, the state can put out any propaganda it wants. It can ensure that it can send funds to folks through that media house. It should be a business, but it's not. So every single employee there, everybody who's making a dollar from that so-called enterprise is really just getting money from the state.
Right.
And it can also use that as a whip to punish the independent media, because an independent media got to pay their rent, got to ensure that their overheads are met independently
right.
as a business,
Yeah.
and have to compete with a state-run media that is getting free money and getting subsidized. And that can't work.
Right.
But that's what we see in Ghana. So one of my first recommendations would be the sale as a going concern of every single state-owned media house, Chronicle, NCN, all of them. The sale as a going concern, and let them run with it.
Yeah.
And legislation to be passed that the state should not own or be involved in or govern any media house for the dissemination of information.
Yeah.
I think it is fundamentally important, and we've seen that it works.
Good.
The other aspect of that is that the state shouldn't be running a business anyway.
Yes.
So
right.
that's part of the issue.
You know, I like this because we're going to double back on it very interestingly in the Venezuela-Guyana border dispute and the position that the media is playing in Venezuela, for example. All right, and I think it's very important because I think Guyanese need to understand that when it comes to the power of the media and the way information is now disseminated to us, that a good example when it's playing against you is when you look at what is occurring in Venezuela, of an entire nation being told that Essequibo belongs to them. An entire narrative is being peddled by that government, and the people are buying it hook, line, and sinker because they believe the media is telling them the truth. And that is state media in Venezuela as well.
Well, I think that you got to be fair and you got to look at things from both sides. In Guyana, the media, the schools, our parents, our politicians have said to Guyanese citizens since Guyana was independent that it belongs to us.
Right.
So if your only argument is that the Venezuelan citizen has been brainwashed, we're not far away from that. Because the information that has been given to us is so superficial that it cannot be called education. It got to be called propaganda. I'll give you two examples. There's a song, Not a Blade of Grass.
Right.
How much information is in that? Isn't it just vitriol and...
Is we on?
Is we on.
Right.
And the bumper stickers that say the other slogan that you just said. If you got two kids in a schoolyard, and one is big and strong, and the other one is little, and all they are doing in their quarrel is exchanging slogans and superficial vitriol like that, it will lead to a fight. The little kid knows immediately that it is in his interest to articulate his position from an educated and reasonable point of view, giving the whole history, or else he's going to get his ass kicked.
Right.
Now, Venezuela has standing armed forces of 300,000 people and more. Let me say that again. Venezuela got standing armed forces of 300,000
Not to
people
mention
and more.
reserves, which
I think we got 2,000 or
Right.
3,000. Something like
active
that.
military, right?
Don't let us resort to vitriol and shout across the border at each other is we own, because that will
We're the
only
small
lead in
one in the
direction.
schoolyard,
Yes.
right?
We have to implement systems that truly educate our people as to the history of the dispute, how it came about, the fact that the Venezuelans back in the 1880s and 1890s petitioned America and petitioned President Cleveland and Secretary of State Alney, petitioned them to insist that there be arbitration. That the Venezuelans appointed 2 of the arbitrators and England appointed 2 of the arbitrators, and those arbitrators decided where the line is in the boundary of Essequibo. And after that, a Venezuelan and a British team, remember British Guyana, we weren't independent then, went and did a survey and confirmed that line and drew a map, and both parties signed off. And that is where the line is that Guyanese have always recognized. The only reason...
But even Venezuela has recognized up
all
to
the
now.
time, although they didn't like the finding of the arbitration, they asked for the arbitration. They picked the arbitrators. In 1949, Venezuela heard somebody say he had died, he had been present in the arbitration, that the thing had been unfairly done. And that is their sole reason, their sole justification for saying we got to go back to this thing over 100 years old and change it, and it's null and void because this man said so. That is their sole justification. And this is why they have avoided going to the ICJ. They've avoided any recourse to the International Court of Justice, which is where they should have gone to. They're scrambling to find any other way, and the large kid in the schoolyard is being a bully. He does not want a fair, ethical, rational, and lawful resolution, because he knows what that resolution is. He wants his own way. But the only way Guyana can answer that is by educating our citizens so that we are not shouting back vitriol, but we are giving the explanation rationally and reasonable as to what has happened. Now, that being said, I want to say clearly that insofar as in 2018, when the Secretary General of the United Nations says he can't use his good office anymore, he's not making any sense to resolve this dispute and refer it to the International Court of Justice, the Granger administration, which in every other regard was visionless, hopeless, and incompetent, promptly put together a team and submitted our claim to the International Court of Justice with the help...
This is read by Kyle Greenwich.
In 2018, yes, with the help and with the agreement of the PPP members who were involved. And both sides, PPP and PNC, have done really well in pushing this case forward, pushing it through the ICJ and presenting it with a team of real experts. And I have to give them credit.
Absolutely. And I just want to say Anug as well with Ralph Ramkran, because I know he was part of that team as well. Yeah, absolutely. So, all right, I want to get down to the nitty gritty here of some very interesting things. I'm going to ask you some very direct questions. I'm going to start with what worries the Guyanese people the most at this moment. And I want your take on it. Right now, as everyone has noticed, okay, there has been an extremely large influx of Venezuelans in Guyana. And I'm not even going to say Guyana because I want to be fair. This has been happening before this border controversy started a few years ago. The Venezuelans, because of their economic situation, has been dispersing into surrounding countries. Trinidad had it, Colombia had it, Brazil had it. I remember even taking a trip to Brazil and there was Venezuelans, living on the streets in tents and so on. Very similar to what's been happening in Guyana. But by the time they get to Georgetown, they most of the time had figured it out. Nonetheless, we have been watching as a people, and to much, I think, of the general public's worry, that there has not been much control of the method these Venezuelans have been coming in and the documentation of these Venezuelans, and then they're slowly but surely maneuvering into our everyday society. Now, I'm definitely not saying this to be, I think the word is xenophobic, right? The fearful of immigrants. Because at the end of the day, there are lots of very good Venezuelans that come here, immigrants in general, whether Cubans for our doctors, Venezuelans, I know there's lots of very highly educated Venezuelan people that do come over and contribute to our society positively. But what we have found recently, because of this border situation, is a lot of Guyanese becoming uneasy. And we have been watching little tiny snippets that the government has been doing that I think has been making people a little bit more uneasy. And I'll talk about the very simple, blatant one of all our police cars now say policia. All right? I mean, at one point, they didn't even say police anymore. And I just would like to, it's one of those situations, if you're not going to laugh, you're going to cry, because you wonder to yourself, in a situation, in a controversy like we are currently embattled in, what would bring you to make a decision to completely rebrand our entire Guyana police force across the country with a Spanish term? The reason I say that is just based on strict logic. You know how I and you know what the word policia means, even though it's Spanish? Well, a Spanish person
must know what police means in English.
Okay. So you sit down and you wonder, well, this doesn't make any logical sense.
That was the single large act of stupidity for the year, I think. I don't know that there's any justification for it. But
right.
Going back to the point you're making, this is something that we have to acknowledge. Our borders are so large, and our governments for 60 years have been so hopelessly incompetent and unable to manage even our small issues, let alone a large issue like Venezuela potential immigration, that it's asking too much to really expect our government to be able to manage this. But there are dangers, and those dangers have to be looked at, because if you don't nip something in the bud, if you don't anticipate a problem, that problem grows until it becomes a calamity, and then it's too late to deal with it. We have a culture that we have to be proud of, and it's a mixed up culture that is unrecognizable if you try to trace it back to its African and Indian roots. It is a wonderful mishmash of a culture. We eat our cook-up with achar, okay? And that mix is so impossible, you don't see it anywhere else. Now, I treasure that. And over the years, I have seen inroads made that worry me. There is in Georgetown, Church Street going back to Regent Street in Albertown, a growing, thriving Brazilian community. On Sheriff Street, there is a growing, thriving, and up the East Coast, Venezuelan community. We are 700,000 strong, and that's a drop in the ocean. We can be overwhelmed and subsumed, and what's familiar to us can disappear easily. Now, the fact is, the people who have that personal drive, that get up and go, to say, I'm living in Venezuela, and my salary, because of Maduro's hopeless administration, is now worth 4 or 5 United States dollars a month. I could barely buy 2 loaves of bread with it. I have to leave. And the people who aren't content to stay there, but have the drive and the get up and go to leave, that's the kind of people you want in your society, you know.
Right.
Those are the people who are motivated and are willing to
for a better life,
autonomous action and do things. That's what you want. That's what you call a brain drain. It is the best and brightest of the Guyanese that left over the 40 years. We are seeing the best and the most upwardly mobile coming, the people who want better and who are determined to have better. We got to welcome them, but we got to welcome them on our terms. They got to speak English. I do not feel that I need to see any police car that got Spanish or Portuguese on it. They have to conform to our norms. Our infrastructure barely holds us up. You go to Georgetown Hospital and you wait hours to get any real service. If you want a CAT scan done or an MRI, you got to come back next week. If foreigners come and begin to use the infrastructure that we have that is already barely holding on, already doesn't manage for our 700,000 people, we are going to have serious problems. So education, health, all the social structures, they need to be carefully regulated. And let me tell you, for me, a foreigner should not have access to free education in Ghana and should not have access to free health in Ghana. They should pay for it.
I have something to say to that, but go on.
Now, the Venezuelans and every foreigner, the Americans, the English, the Brazilians, all of them who come, there needs to be a careful monitoring of their honoring their tax obligations, of their registration in the society, and they need to be encouraged in the society But if they are not complying, and if they are not employed, and if they are not contributing to the society, and a period of time passes,
Right.
and we see that they are a burden on the society rather than a benefit to the society, they got to go back.
Correct.
We're not getting any of that done. We're not even touching the tip of the iceberg in terms of regulation, monitoring, looking at numbers and that kind of thing. And the problem is growing, and it's growing, and it may already be beyond the ability of the powers that be to fix.
Okay.
But I want to say very clearly, we need to welcome these people, because Guyanese have been welcomed around the world. We need to appreciate that these people bring skills that we probably don't already have. If you talk to farmers, if you talk to construction folk, they will tell you that these are hardworking people who bring methods and bring a work ethic that we need, that is
Right.
good for us. But we need to ensure that they're paying their taxes, that they're not a burden to our infrastructure, and they're not competing with Guyanese to get into schools, to get a space in the hospital if you're sick. We have to make sure that it's working properly.
Okay. I want to, we're going to shift gears in the conversation. We're going to stay on topic, but I want to discuss a little bit deeper the mismanagement of this influx of foreigners in the country. And what I don't think a lot of people are recognizing what's happening is we are being put in a position as Guyanese citizens to be given second-class treatment or third-class treatment. Why? Because the foreigners are coming and getting the treatment that we are now lacking. And why I say that is because you want to say that the Venezuelans are coming and using our infrastructure, our police, our securities, our health, our education, our public services, and it's putting a strain on the system when contributing back very little. They come and they get jobs, but are they paying NIS and PAYE, and are they, doing tax returns?
I don't think it's fair to pass judgment now without the information. But what I'm saying is that before the problem is bigger than we are,
right,
we need to anticipate what can happen, and we need to be taking measures now as a country to make sure that they're paying their NIS and paying their
right.
tax.
But I want to show from another side why I think this is even more problematic than we think it is. I'm going to tell the I just sent the operator. I just sent a article to you. It's the first one with that came out on the audit, the US 7.3 billion US audit from Liza 1 and 2 bills revealed. I'm going to ask to bring this up because this is something that came out in this whole audit scandal recently. And I think it's so critically important for people to understand how we are being mismanaged when it comes to what we are given as citizens and what the foreigners are coming and being given. And I group all foreigners here, okay? And that's why you heard me, well, you know what's coming. It's about the oil audit. So here you have it, and you can read it here, guys. Exxon billed Guyana US $10.3 million US dollars for private drivers. Okay, that's a job, they're getting paid. But here's the next one. US $2.2 million in school fees for expat children. Now I want that to register with a lot of people, okay? We have now, this is cost recoverable because this is in the audit. So Exxon has taken this money away from the oil money, right? They've taken this back and said, well, this is what we pay, all right? That is 2.2 million US dollars that the people of Guyana are paying expats' children to go to school. Now, I want to discuss what that means when it comes to utilizing our systems and we not having any sort of counterbalance or development in our systems in order to make sure we are growing and getting better as more people come, or at least protecting what we have. The second point, I'm just gonna hammer it home with this one, is as we all know, this whole country, right through, left, right, and center, are getting blackouts daily. We are getting blackouts because the oil industry and the construction industry, which is facilitated by the oil money, is now sucking more energy out of our GPL, out of our public energy system, and we are now suffering for it. So what we are watching is slowly but surely, our lives degrading, but the expats continuing to grow and utilize and, well, as we saw here, gain, because their children are gaining top class education. Because guess what? You don't need to pay $2.2 million to public schools for children to go to school. So guess what kind of schools they're going to? Private, right? And we are now watching a slow, I can't even say slow, a very quickly degrade, blackout included, of us suffering while they are coming and reaping from our land. So we now draw this similarity back to the Venezuelans, in which, again, as I said, are, as we all know, I know you want statistics, and I hear you, but I think every Guyanese out there that has a head on their shoulders knows that most Venezuelans working in Guyana are not paying their fair share of taxes. All right? Because we know for a fact, statistically, most Guyanese not paying their taxes. So the reality is, we are now watching our way of life degrade due to the influx of what's happening. So we, again, and I'm going to bring this back very clearly to mismanagement and incompetence. Now, back to your Venezuela conversation, or touch on that topic if you'd like.
Well, here's the thing. The contract that we made with Exxon was a poor contract. We all know this. And there is little to no control and oversight and limitations on how they can spend money for all of these nice things. Mm-hmm. So as you say, they pay their employees for those employees' children to go to school. Mm-hmm. And they pay those school fees. And that is a horrendously unfair thing, because what it does is that it guarantees that those foreigners who are coming here to live in our society are extricating themselves from our mud, from our Demerara mud, and they're going into some nice highbrow school mm-hmm. that no one else can afford. Mm-hmm. And they're becoming first-class citizens along with the politicians. Mm-hmm. So that rankles right away. What I will say, however, is that I think that the system has to be geared, has to change, so that we improve our education system in the public schools.
Correct.
Now, for me, I've already said, and I've said it many times, I would have a different income tax regime for non-Guyanese than for mm-hmm. Guyanese. Because if your engineer comes from abroad to work for Exxon, and his income tax is at 25%, but a Guyanese engineer will only have to pay 15% income tax, he will be at a competitive advantage, yeah. and it'll be in everybody's interest to hire the Guyanese. That's one thing.
But just to stick a pin on that, sorry, just to stick a pin, we know the expats, especially our companies, are paying their employees pay no taxes in Guyana. Just so we make that very clear.
Well, again,
their paychecks, the engineer sitting next to the Guyanese engineer paying the PAYE and the NIS, and the American engineer, or wherever they come from, are not paying $1 and being paid more.
Well, again, I'm not sure about mm-hmm. that, because there are laws that require mm-hmm. that if you are earning income in Guyana, you pay tax in Guyana, even for a period of time.
But it's for the oil companies that they get the exemption, no?
Well,
in the contract.
I know that there are exemptions mm-hmm. that are given out, mm-hmm. and I know that because there are no limitations on expenses, mm-hmm. all of that can be accommodated, and you pay them more, and you take it back as a deduction as an expense, so that in the end, the oil company is not losing. But I think the larger picture that we have to look at is recognizing that as the status quo. Mm-hmm. And what you just pointed out there is money that is injected into a business in Guyana, school, albeit a school. But that is money that will be circulating in the Guyanese economy. And that might actually be better, in my point of view. That mm-hmm. might actually be better than the money going into the bank account in New York to be fiddled with by our politicians, and for them to borrow money against that as security mm-hmm. and then give contracts to family and friends. So it might actually be a good thing for there to be a direct injection of money into the society, into the businesses, even if it is done that way. Because think about what the alternative is. But the fact is,
I can argue this, but this is I hear you. I see you trying to be positive.
This is but this is what we're faced with. Mm-hmm. It's not going to change.
Right.
So what do we do? To me, what we have to do is we have to acknowledge that there are the very highbrow private schools. I read that article, and that's international school in Prashad, used to be in Prashad.
The American school.
Right. There are the second tier of private schools that hardworking Guyanese who are lucky enough can send their children to. I know you send
the Marian,
to one.
right.
I send my children to them. You work, you send them. You're glad you can afford it. Sometimes you can barely afford it by the skin of your teeth, but you are glad that you are giving your child this kind of opportunity. And then you have the parents who cannot afford it and are sending their children to the public schools that are run by the state. Now, we have to accept what 60 years of mismanagement has done in Guyana. In the 1960s and early 70s, under Britain, the education system in Guyana ranked among the top 6 in the Commonwealth. It was an excellent education system. Every afternoon supporter tries to praise Burnham for taking it over and making it free. But what we saw after it was taken over after independence and seized from the Catholic institutions and all of that is a gradual and steady and irresistible decline in the quality of education until we got 9 and 10-year-olds now in the public schools who are illiterate. And I'm not talking illiterate as in they read slowly. They cannot read.
Over 50% of children in this last common entrance failed English and math.
We have a society where nearly 30% is illiterate, functionally illiterate,
completely
as a result
of
state management of schools. That's got to improve. Now, if we can focus our attention not on building a new concrete school with small windows without thinking about the air conditioning that it will need, but on paying teachers and getting good quality teachers that do their jobs and raise the level of education in the society, we need to bring the quality of public schools on par with private schools so that we are doing our duty by our children as a whole. And we are not creating this disparity where you got the children who have no choice crowded into and bundled into public schools.
Right.
And you know that 60 to 70% of them will have a problem. And 3 or 4 or 5% of them will end up going to the best schools, QC and bishops, and the rest of them will be destroyed before they even start. Right. You cannot create a hopeless situation like that for your children. I
wanna speak about something very, very critical in this scenario. And I'm telling you because I'm actually going to come from a personal point of view on how I have analyzed this situation. So we all know that Guyana's biggest hinder in development is our brain drain here. All the qualified professionals leave because they are not compensated properly, there's not as many opportunities, and they do not have a standard of life that they can be comfortable with. Okay? These are educated. I'm talking about our doctors, our nurses, our teachers, our engineers. Okay? These are the main people I am speaking about. Now, we see that calls all over the world. If you're a teacher and you've gone through training, apply. Canada will take you. If you're a doctor, anywhere you want in the world, they're snatching you up immediately. Registered nurses, probably the easiest people to find a job in the whole world right now. All right? And they know this. And the embassies, the countries themselves, the first world, England, Canada, America, Norway, Denmark, blah, 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 are calling them publicly. Find your embassy, find our embassy, register, go online, register. We will take you. Okay? And here's what the trick is. Almost the only precursor they need to get this is to learn our language. All right? So I, for example, know a girl right now. She's a Cuban trained doctor and she's in Guyana right now, working at public hospital, getting little to no pay. Right now, for the next year, you know what she told me? All I'm doing right now, Mr. Jabour, is learning how to speak German because I've already applied and they've accepted me and they said I only need to pass a German test and I'm going to move to Germany next year. So every day when she done at the hospital, her hours, she's go home and study German. She gone. Okay? So I'm going to say something very political here. Okay? And I'm going to say that I said that what I said just now so everybody can be on the same page. We accept brain drain is occurring in this country on mass amounts. All right? The question now is why? And I will tell you, as a professional, as somebody who has come back and can offer something to society as an employee to develop, to build, I have no interest in doing that because I will not be compensated. I will not be being able to live comfortable. Now, my question here is, if this country has always been rich. Let's start with the basics. This country has always been hand over fist rich with all of our natural resources. And now with oil, more money than God, as Biden likes to say, right? We got all the money, more money than we can ever know what to deal with. Just to throw this one back out at you guys, it is 7.7 million US, almost 10 million US. When a new ship comes on, it'll be much more. 10 million US on average per day, every 24 hours is what this country is making. Okay? It fluctuates between 7.7 to $10 million every single day, every 24 hours. That's what we are making. And those numbers came from Hess, that's about to be bought out by Chevron, obviously for a reason. Nonetheless, my question is, if all of us know this and all of us see this, the teachers about to go on strike, the doctors and nurses leaving, we got all these issues, the engineers not being paid properly from the oil, even the oil companies. Why is it that the government has not stepped in by now with the resources they have and given people more and given their public servants more, paid the teachers better? Why are they not doing it? I want you to answer me that question. I can answer it, as I said, it'll be a very political answer, but I'd like you to tell me what you think is the reason they are not paying these people properly and allowing them to leave by the masses. Almost like they're encouraging them to leave.
No kickbacks.
So the government themselves are not gaining.
You see,
Tell me.
you give a contract to build a school, build a road, build a bridge. You make a friend by doing that, and you might get a kickback by doing that. There is no benefit, no money coming back to you if you increase salaries. But at the end of the day, if you are trumpeting that you spending billions and billions of dollars to build a school, and you want to say you're going to put teachers in there and pay them $80,000 to $90,000 a month, you should have stayed home. You're wasting your time building a school because you have not improved the quality of education in there. We have to pay our public sector, and we have to pay our administrators and our teachers and our nurses and our police more. Until we do that, we will get poor quality service and we will not see an improvement in what's going on. Now, there's no way around that, and yet it seems that we're not grasping that, we're not understanding that. What's happening, and I think that this may be light at the end of the tunnel, a little ray of hope, is that as the private sector is increasing, and our private sector is growing, not because of good policies, but because with all the foreigners that are coming in, you have need for housing, you have need for services to provide for them, you got need for food and all of these things,
Everything.
transportation, everything.
Everything.
So there are jobs available, and because there are jobs available, and because people want good folk working in those jobs, salaries are going up in the private sector. It's not happening as quickly as it should, and it's not happening in a regulated way, but it is happening. I think we need to reach a stage where we are incentivizing people to improve their education to a tertiary level by having a very varied rate of salary in the police force, in the teaching service. That if you got a degree, your salary is 50% more than your co-teacher who does not have a degree. Incentivize them by giving them time off to go, but you gotta start paying them. And when you start paying them, you will have motivated people. I've said that in this forum before, and we've actually had a debate about it. About the pride a policeman will have in his uniform if he's earning 2,000 US and has the dignity to know he's paying his mortgage and looking after his family and sending his children to the private schools that we just talked about. You give them that dignity, you give them pride in themselves and pride in their uniform, and that is your starting point. If you don't do that, we will continue to migrate, we will continue to take bribes, and we will continue to tolerate and be part of corruption.
Okay. I want to comment it from another angle. I think this is being purposely done. I think they're actively encouraging any educated professional, anybody with a head on their shoulders, to leave. I think they want the smart people to leave so that the uneducated stay here and they can manipulate them and say, vote for me, don't worry about how bad your life is.
Now, there is a train of thought like that, and I voiced it, and it's a bit obscure, it takes some explaining, but there is truth in it. You see, when you go in the villages and you talk to the simple, humble, ordinary folk who are autonomous because they're doing some farming, they got a vegetable patch, they got some edo down by the creek and that kind of thing, and they, kill a chicken when they need to kill a chicken. So they're doing their own thing. These simple folk vote race, and there's no getting away from it. But you know what happens when you take that same person and you give them a degree, and you have them driving to work to a job that they enjoy, and they have the luxury of dropping their child to a private school. And they then ask themselves, why is it that they got to drive a 1500cc Corolla when this minister is rolling past in his Prado, having paid no tax for that Prado, when you've had to pay $1 million tax for your little 1500cc Corolla?
Right.
Suddenly you start to ask real questions like that. You start to ask why it is that you got to send your child to public school and it's so crowded and the teachers aren't doing their job. And you start asking questions because you are upwardly mobile and you want an improved life, not just for you, but for your family and for your children. And you're thinking about the future and you're thinking holistically about the administration in the country. And that's dangerous if the administration in the country is incompetent.
Right.
So it is true that the politicians feel much safer if they can pretend to be a deity and they go in the simple folks, say, oh, the president come in, and they get excited and put garlands around the neck and all of that. Because I'm sure you'll agree, if the minister comes to your house, you're not getting the garland, he might get some hard questions.
Yeah, right.
But when they go to these simple folk that they like, that they're comfortable with, because they're not asked
And walk with two
penetrating
motorbikes,
questions,
walk with a tractor, walk with some...
and you protect a gift.
Right.
And then, to my astonishment, you got people posting on social media, oh, this minister is a man of the people, he's such a humble person, look, he come and hug me up and take a picture with me. And I have to ask myself, is that what you want of your leader, or do you want someone who has the competence to understand holistically what the problems are and implement policies and fix policies to fix them, so that we don't have a Mahdia school fire, so that we don't have the kind of issues we have with GPL that you just discussed, so that our problems are anticipated and dealt with before they become catastrophes?
But that's a joke, right? They're creating the problems and then pretending to be the savior. GPL does not have the capacity. They knew from 2021 that they were not going to have the capacity by 2023, yet no one did anything. And now saying, don't worry, folks, I'm bringing in 4 generators. I will fix it for y'all.
They knew it long before 2021.
There you go.
Because the fact is that there's been a massive migration from rural areas. There's been a huge housing drive over the last 20 years. Areas that didn't exist before, Diamond, Grove, Enterprise, now have large places of population, where centers where people are living and using electricity.
Yeah.
Commercial buildings are going up. There's more air conditioning. As I just said, the nature of the construction is such that you got to air condition, because you got concrete structures with little tiny windows. It has to be air conditioned, and more electricity is being used. And they knew years ago, because it was said to them that there needs to be greater generation capacity, and it was ignored. And they knew years ago, and I personally have dealt with many people who have come in offering, talking to the government, saying, we will set up this generation capacity, this windmill or this solar plant, or use timber products to burn and generate electricity, and have been turned down. And again, you got to ask yourself, why is it? Why is it that these independent private generators, people who will come and generate electricity and feed into the grid, aren't given contracts? This is how New York City works. This is how the large
Barbados has a whole contract for it that you can immediately start doing it.
You
right
have,
there.
You have private people supplying, and you have redundancy. You have more electricity than you need, and you guarantee them that you're going to buy a minimum amount of electricity, and they guarantee you a ceiling on the price, and you never get blackout.
There you go.
There's a reason we don't do that. Generating electricity got a lot of money and kickbacks in it.
Okay. I just want to, I'm going to slip in something here. Correct me if I'm wrong. You were GPL's lawyer for some time?
I still do work for GPL from time to time, but yes, we acted for GPL for a long time.
That's all. I just like the fact that you're coming from a...
No, but sorry, that doesn't give me inside knowledge to what I'm talking about here.
The lawyers know more than they lead on. But nonetheless, what I'm going to draw back to now, because I'm going to get into another harsh question here, because I think this is probably the topic that I think needs to be dealt with more forefrontally. And I think they're looking, the country themselves, the people are very uneasy with this Venezuela situation. I need to double back on it. I think it's something that deserves a little bit more conversation. We only have about 10 more minutes, but I want you as a leader, Mr. Timothy Jonas, as a political leader in this country, as a part of a political party that has a seat in parliament, which is ANUG. What do you propose can be the right method of moving forward, handling this Venezuela. I know you touched on it a little bit, but I'd like you to maybe give a synopsis of what you, as a leader, let's say you were in Irfan Ali's position, you were president of this country, what needs to happen?
Well, I've said before that I have to congratulate him and his predecessor for their method and their approach. They are very aware that we can't carry a fight, and they have conscientiously, without stepping back, pressed for lawful solutions using lawful procedures internationally. In 1966, they signed the Geneva Agreement and used the good offices of the Secretary General of the United Nations. When that failed into 2018, the Secretary General said you have to go to the International Court of Justice, and our leaders immediately put together a legal team and went to the International Court of Justice. They have quietly used every lawful recourse and have tried their best. And this is what I think is also important, and I think that they've done it, although we don't have much leverage, we're a tiny country, but tried their best to consolidate and attract support from our international neighbors, so that we've got a statement from CARICOM saying that we have to pursue lawful measures, and that Venezuela's talk about holding a referendum is a threat to peace, and that we are a peaceful part of the world and we need to stay that way, and that's our obligation. Calling on Venezuela to adopt lawful approaches. We've had support from the OAS. We need to remind the Americans that it is the Americans that compelled Britain to go to arbitration, and the arbitration was done under the auspices of the American Secretary of State Alney and President Cleveland, and therefore under their auspices a solution was arrived at, a decision was given, and it is for them to say it was done lawfully and it must be binding. I remember a few years ago we had talks with Brazil, and Brazil talked about the importance of recognizing existing boundaries. So I think that the powers that be are doing what they can, being very aware that this can't escalate because we lose. So we are in the right legally, we are in the right ethically. Historically, there's a reason Venezuela is not going to the International Court of Justice for a resolution, because they know they will lose. They know they don't have a legal leg to stand on. But we have been professionally and diligently pursuing that option, and I've got to give credit where credit is due. Our leaders have done well in that regard. One thing we need to do, we need to educate the population level of Guyanese, and maybe courses online, maybe something on the television, something in school, explaining the history. Because this not a blade of grass foolishness is vitriol. It's a cliche. It raises and escalates rather than calming and rationalizing. And Guyanese need to be able to articulate calmly and rationally why it is that the historical developments put us in the right legally and ethically. This not a blade of grass thing, it doesn't help the conversation. We need to be able to discuss it intelligently, and there needs to be an education program. That's the change I would make.
So I'm going to ask a very tricky question here, but I want to be kind of the voice of Guyanese here. I want to try and get to the average man, how they're feeling, and what, maybe give an answer or figure out something that may or may not cause them any comfort. But I think the conversation needs to be had. If Venezuela, worst case scenario, Venezuela was to decide, you know what, we're walking in, and we go in and take over Essequibo, right? As you mentioned earlier, they have the standing army to do it. They have the military capability to do it. One of the things I think maybe had some slight small comfort is the fact that they only want Essequibo. So all those in Georgetown might not need to panic, and Berbice might not need to panic as much, but those in Essequibo are going to have a situation to be dealt with. Now, here's a question that I think many Guyanese across the board are also wondering. If there were to be military action by Venezuela, can or would there, or is it even possible for any international entity to step in to defend Guyana, or to try and keep peace somehow? Or, I'm looking at the likes of, obviously people think with Exxon here and so on, America might come and defend us, or maybe in the conversation, maybe Brazil, to just maintain peace on their borders. But I think Guyanese themselves are very uneasy with not knowing if there's any support behind the words being spoken by politicians or by a court for that matter?
That's beyond my area of competence. I simply don't know. What I can tell you is when you look at what's going on in Israel and Palestine right now, that defies any logic if you are going to pretend that the great powers, the superpowers, are trying to get a fair result.
Right.
Because we are seeing the decimation of a civilian population. Nobody's doing anything about it. You're talking about the bully in the schoolyard. Slow and methodical destruction of people.
Yeah.
And no one's done anything about it. So why, I think it would be a bit naive to assume that because it's the right thing and because we're legally in the right, some superpower is going to come to save us. But that being said, there must be a means of leverage. And the fact is that we have demonstrated that we have honored our contract with Exxon. We've demonstrated that we have done our best to accommodate the new visitors, the oil and gas folk who are coming in. We have shown that we have maintained democratic principles and our society is stable. And I think that that must provide some kind of negotiating leverage face to face with Venezuela, given what Venezuela has been doing over the past 5-10 years. But all I can do is hope. And as I said, outside of my area of competence, I just do not know what motivates these superpowers to jump in some places and not in others.
So now let me ask a very simple question, just the last question just before we wrap up. Do you think the government of Guyana should be spending more on our military capability?
No. What we got, Kian? I think we bought a water cannon the other day.
Oh, Jesus.
Kian, we are, if we even look in that direction, we lose already. That is hopeless, futile, and it does not add to our economy.
Okay.
I have long believed our GDF is an institution that remains organized despite the chaos that's happened in our society. The GDF is a well-organized, well-structured institution, but I believe that its forces should be geared more, as they do in the States with the reserves, engineering, civil defense, building bridges, building sea defenses, that kind of thing. And their training should go in that direction.
Okay. So not actually fighting.
Who we fighting and what? Right. So I think that we can't look at it in that direction at all. And the GDF, as one of the institutions that remains in Guyana as a viable, self-standing institution, needs to reconsider its objectives and how it's training its officers and its soldiers, and what service they can provide to Guyana in terms of helping the infrastructure and moving things forward.
I brought that question up because I actually agree with you very much so. No matter how much money we invest in our army, we will never be as strong as Venezuela. All right? I mean, just strictly almost based on the fact that we're too far behind in time and expertise. But nonetheless, irrelevant to that side, I think what we need to start educating the public on, the reason I'm having and asking these questions as a normal Guyanese, is understanding that I think first and foremost, we need to accept that fighting is not an option. And that should be almost in every aspect of our lives, but at least particularly more so in this scenario. We're going to end up in an Israel-Gaza situation where we are the Gaza Strip and Venezuela is Israel. And there's nothing that we will ever have enough resources to be able to deal with if push came to shove with a fight. And I think it's important to start to speak to Guyanese very frankly and open about these things, in understanding that you have to now start opening your mind and understanding there has to be other ways that you can contribute in a fight like this. And educating yourself and becoming more aware. And as you mentioned multiple times, speaking on a solid foundation of knowledge is the best way that we can address this problem. And I think that's what needs to be understood a little bit more from Guyanese. This whole idea of America coming to save we, Brazil coming to save we, coming out of army anyway, or the UN or whoever you want to speak about. Let's be real. These guys all have their own problems, all dealing with their own mess. This is not a problem for them. And we as a people need to understand that there are other methods that we need to start approaching and wrapping our head around when dealing with these types of situations.
Which have been started already and have been activated by our respective governments, using the machinery that is available through the United Nations and the International Court of Justice, and doing it the right way, doing the right thing, and saying this is the legal position. That is what we have been doing, and that's what we need to continue to do.
Absolutely. I don't want to hear anybody screaming about rigors. I don't want anybody screaming about politics. If you want to contribute genuinely to Guyana, this conversation has to shift of we are Guyanese, a united people, and this is the situation we're in, and this is how we are addressing it and trying to fix it, and this is what you have to portray to the people out there in Guyana. It is a unified nation, and we stand together, and we know what our legal rights are, and here is the basis and foundation of it. Right?
Well, it's funny you say that, because even that song, Not a Blade of Grass, says that we're simple people and we have our quarrels, but when people with foreign faces come, then we unite. Right. And I think that might be the only motivating factor to make us all sit down in the same room. But we'll start our quarrels again when this particular fear is over.
Agreed. On that note, guys, it is now 7:30, so we have to wrap up here on Apolitically Incorrect Guyana. I'd like to thank Mr. Jonas again for joining us. And we will be back here next week to speak about any advances or any type of changes we've had with these types of situations, and we'll do our best to continue to educate everybody in our own little way here on Apolitically Incorrect Guyana. So once again, my name is KIAN Jabour, and thank you very much for joining us this evening. Be safe out there, and we will be back here next Friday.